Welcome back to TopTenz. I'm your host, Eric Malachite, as Karl is on vacation, and today we're talking about 10 terrifying rural true crime stories with a script provided by Ben Falbo. If he's provided social links, they'll be linked alongside my own channel and books. With that said, let's jump into it. Whether it's the most crowded cities or the sleepiest of suburbs, one needn't look too far for what evil men can do. However, the often tranquil countryside or the most desolate of rural locales can also play host to some truly horrific events. From small towns to scenic farmlands, these rural true crime stories will keep you up at night. As always, given the subject matter, we'll discuss some rather disturbing topics, so keep that in mind before diving in. And let's start with number 10, the Vesper Axe Murders. Terrifying true crime stories might be a fixture of modern media, but they've also been present since the early 1900s. Case in point is the tale of the Moore family, as well as two of their friends, who were slain one hot night in the summer of 1912. The victims consisted of Josiah, Sarah, their 4 children, and 2 of their close friends, Ina May and Lena Gertrude Stillinger, who were visiting at the time of the murders. However, what should have been a peaceful evening soon turned into an unimaginable horror show. Following a pleasant night out at the local Presbyterian church, the whole group returned home and went to bed. Following their drift off to slumber, the still unknown assailant entered the home and began their cruel work. The next morning, several missed calls from Josiah's clerk and the family's absence during their usual morning rituals quickly set off warning signs for their neighbors. Eventually, the town marshal arrived on the scene, kicking down the door and eventually discovering everyone slaughtered in various rooms throughout the house. Amongst the mangled remains of the victims were a bloodied axe, a slab of bacon, as well as clothing covering any mirrors in the house. Number 9, the Keddie Murders. In the early 80s, the small town of Keddie, located in Northern California, was rocked by a crime nothing short of stomach churning. The site of the murders, a quaint cabin, was populated by the Sharp family, who had only moved in the previous year. The family consisted of the mother, Sue, a divorcee, and her children, John, Sheila, Tina, Rick, and Greg. However, the charming Keddie resort where the family made their home would soon become their final resting place in April 1981. On the evening of April 11th, Sheila stayed at another nearby cabin, taking part in a sleepover with the Siebold family. That night, a 14-year-old Sheila went to bed, comforted in the knowledge that her whole family was only a stone's throw away. However, the next morning, upon returning to her family's cabin for a change of clothes for church, she walked right into a waking nightmare. There, in the cabin's living room, were the bodies of Sue, John, and Dana, all bound with medical tape and electrical cords. Tina's body was the only one unaccounted for, and eventually she was discovered 3 years later, roughly 100 miles from Keddie. To this day, despite some theorizing and several fruitless leads, the culprits behind the murders have yet to be identified. Number 8, the Canon Barbie killers. Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka, as far as outward appearances go, were as unthreatening and normal as possible. However, underneath their blonde hair and white bread demeanors were 2 greatly disturbed minds who'd soon turn Toronto into their twisted playground. Paul Bernardo was already well on his way to infamy before his marriage to Karla, having committed several sexual assaults in Scarborough, Ontario back in 1987. Bernardo's sadism did appeal to one woman, however, Karla, who, much like Paul, was far more unhinged than her appearance and upbringing would suggest. In a disturbing twist of fate, Karla was not only okay with Paul's deranged sexual proclivities, but encouraged and participated in them. In 1990, they carried out their most heinous crime when the duo drugged, beat, and sexually assaulted Tammy Homolka, Karla's 15-year-old sister. This streak of sexually charged cruelty and murder carried on until early 1993, when Karla left Paul following a beating with a flashlight. Eventually, DNA evidence was able to link Paul back to his crimes in Scarborough, leading to his arrest and both of them being put on trial. Number 7, the Lawson family murders. We now shift focus to the farmlands of Northern Carolina and the disturbing crimes of tobacco farmer Charlie Lawson. Unlike a few of the aforementioned crimes in this list, while we do have a culprit, the reasons for Charles's actions are to this day still an enigma. It was just a few days before Christmas, 1929, and Charlie Lawson had taken his entire family into town for some brand new clothes and a family photo portrait. This included his wife Fanny and his 7 children, Mary, Arthur, James, Mabel, Raymond, Carrie, and Mary Lou. However, in a horrific turn of events, it appears Charles made this day as pleasant as possible to offset the atrocity he was poised to commit. On Christmas Day, as the family was getting on with their day, Charles went to work killing all of them one by one. In quick succession, Charles executed his family with a 12-gauge shotgun and blunt force trauma before eventually shooting himself in the nearby woods. The only family member spared from the murders was Charles's eldest son, Arthur, who'd been running an errand at the time. One theory behind Charles's actions has been his covering up acts of sexual abuse he'd committed against Mary. However, these claims have never fully been substantiated with any actual evidence beyond family gossip and hearsay. Number 6, the Rodin family massacre. The crimes committed against the Rodin family in 2016 were nothing short of a premeditated attack, carried out with an ample amount of malice. On the night of April 21st and into the early hours of April 22nd, 8 members of the family were gunned down in their own homes. The first of the 4 separate crime scenes was discovered when Bobby Jo Manley, Dana's sister, came over to find the house's pets. After calling 911, Manley went to the second home on the property where she found more bodies waiting for her. Shortly after, her brother James Manley came over to check on her and discovered the third crime scene with more of the family's bullet-riddled bodies. Finally, later on in the day, another 911 call alerted police to yet another victim in a private residence in Piketon, a nearby village. It wasn't until 2018 that the culprits, the Wagner family, were arrested and charged for the 8 murders. One of the driving forces behind the killings was revealed to be a custody dispute over Hannah and Jake's then 2-year-old daughter. Number 5, the Grimes sisters. The 1950s were a time of great technological progress for America, especially following the conclusion of World War II, with America seeing growth in employment and birth rates. However, that didn't mean that there didn't still exist an undercurrent of darkness and malevolence lurking in the shadows of American streets. For example, on the night of December 28, 1956, Barbara and Patricia Grimes, 2 Chicagoan sisters, left their home for the last time. The 2 sisters had ventured to the cinema for the evening to take in a screening of the Elvis Presley movie Love Me Tender at the Brighton Theater. 89 minutes later, the 2 sisters saw the credits roll and exited the theater to begin their journey home. Unfortunately, they would never make it back, as their departure from the theater was the last time either of them would ever be seen alive. Following a widespread search for the 2 sisters, their bodies were eventually found on January 22nd, 1957, just off a rural road in Burr Ridge, Illinois. To this day, no definitive culprit or explanation has been given regarding the Grimes sisters' abductions and subsequent murders. While a few suspects were questioned and looked into, this sadly seems to be yet another true crime story that'll go unsolved. Number 4, the Soldering Children disappearance. Christmas Eve is a time of celebration and excitement for the wonders of Christmas Day, unless you're the Sodder family, that is. As the Sodder family went to bed on that very evening in 1945 with visions of sugar plums dancing in their heads, their home would soon be set ablaze. Following a strange late-night call from a woman with a strange laugh, the family's mother, Jenny, was later awakened by a commotion on their roof. Within moments, a devastating fire broke out and quickly engulfed the entire house, sending the entire family into a justifiable panic. Jenny, her husband George, and 4 of their children, Marion, Sylvia, John, and George Jr., were able to escape the raging inferno. However, this left their 5 remaining children, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, still inside their burning home. Despite failed rescue efforts, the family was left to watch their home transform into a smoldering wreck, accepting the likely demise of their other children. However, when the fire department eventually began culling through the house's remains, they found neither hide nor hair of their remains in the ashes. Long after the night's tragic events, speculation ran rampant regarding what became of the 5 missing children and where they went. Number 3, the Gainesville Ripper. All discussions of illegal, illicit, and disturbing events will eventually lead to one or more stories set in the state of Florida. The Florida man in this particular story is Danny Rolling, the Gainesville Ripper, one of America's most notorious serial killers. In late August of 1990, Rolling made Gainesville his personal hunting ground as he would claim the lives of 5 college students. The victims were Sandra Larson, Christina Powell, Krista Hoyt, Manuel Taboda, and Tracy Paulus, all having their lives snuffed out in the most horrific ways possible. Rowling's disturbing deeds didn't end with simply killing the girls, as he would go as far as to arrange their bodies in ritualistic and intentionally shocking ways. This included placing the head of Krista Hoyt on the shelf opposite of her headless body that was left sitting on the edge of her bed. The next month, Rowling was arrested on unrelated charges in Ocala, Florida, but would still end up confessing to his 5 murders in Gainesville. 16 years later, Rowling was finally sentenced to death and was executed by lethal injection on October 25th, 2006 at Florida State Prison. Number 2, the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders. A crime this horrific is something that should have probably been left in the fictitious world of the Friday the 13th film franchise. Sadly, what occurred in Mayes County, Oklahoma in June 1977 was far from fictional. It was quite real and aggressively disturbing. When the young Girl Scouts of Camp Scott went to bed on June 12th, none of them could have expected the horrors that would await them at daybreak. Early the next day, en route to the showers, a camp counselor discovered the first of what would soon be confirmed as 3 dead bodies. As the morning progressed, the bodies were identified as 10-year-old Denise Milner, 9-year-old Michelle Goose, and 8-year-old Lori Farmer. In a stomach-churning revelation, it was later confirmed that the girls had all been sexually assaulted, beaten, and strangled. The neighboring community was horrified, and Camp Scott was immediately closed off, with all remaining campers being sent home. Following a long and highly publicized investigation, one suspect was arrested in connection to the case, though on unrelated charges, that being Jean Leroy Hart. Despite this, there was never enough substantial DNA evidence to confirm Hart as the definitive culprit. Given his death just 2 years after the murders, it's doubtful we'll ever get a definitive answer to who committed the Oklahoma Girl Scout murders. And finally, number 1, the Butcher of Plainfield. Much like many famous serial killers, Ed Gein was a product of his environment and his upbringing, specifically his aggressively religious mother, Augusta. Known as a strange fellow even during his childhood, most people in Plainfield, Wisconsin only ever saw Ed as an awkward, yet ultimately harmless guy. This assumption starkly contrasted the darkness that resided behind his withdrawn expressions, as Ed was nothing short of deranged. Ed was obsessed with his mother, committing his life to taking care of her after she'd suffered a debilitating stroke up until she died in 1945. Her death seemed to flip a switch in Ed, who began a dual hobby of grave robbing and fashioning human remains into clothing. Following his murder of Bernice Warden, a local hardware store owner, police swarmed Ed's home, where they discovered not only Bernice's corpse in the barn, but Ed's handiwork as well. This included chairs made of human skin, faces, skulls, noses, and even a belt made of severed nipples. Ew. Ed's heinous crimes quickly made front-page news, terrifying the masses and even stoking more than a few people's creativity. One can see the influence of Ed Gein in several horror classics, including Psycho, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Silence of the Lambs. That's all we have for you today. I hope you found this video to, at the very least, be informative. Thanks for watching. Be sure to do all that algorithmic jazz, and if Ben Falbo has provided social media links to us, follow us both with the links below. I'm Eric Malachite, and I'll see you next time, Space Cowboy.